This is the Collaboration Dynamics Podcast, helping you work together better with Judy Rees, X-Ray listener, best-selling author, international virtual collaboration trainer, and master of metaphor. Hear more at xraylistening.com.
Hello and welcome to the Collaboration Dynamics Podcast. With me today is Yves Hanoulle. Hello, Yves.
Hello.
Great to have you here. I'm very excited to have you on board because you've been recommended by a couple of my students who I know have worked with you in the past. But would you like to introduce yourself and say the kind of things that you've done in terms of collaboration?
So my name is Yves Hanoulle, and I'm working. These days I call myself a creative collaboration agent, and most of the time, that's a name that I like to differentiate myself with. I do a lot of agile coaching these days, but next to that, I also do a lot of community things. So I've created a few books and articles that I've done in a collaborative way, basically over the internet. So people all do it from their own home or for wherever they want to do it. And I like doing that. I like bringing communities together and creating things. Usually it starts by me having some kind of problem that I try to look for a solution, and then I realize, but there might be other people who have the same problem. So I just share whatever I have, and I ask more people if they want to join in and help solve the problem and help even everybody else at the same time. And that's how I got started a few projects in the last years.
Oh, that's so interesting. Before I ask you about that, let me ask you the question that I ask everyone who comes on the Collaboration Dynamics podcast. When you are collaborating at your best, you are like what?
I think at some points I might be even tired. What I've realized is that when I'm tired, I might there's less filters and there's less things, and I feel that I react much more from my gut feeling, and then it can go in both directions. Then it could be either really good or really bad. So it's not that I should say I will always not sleep and then I'm always at my best. That's not it. But what I've noticed in some of the moments that I was really good in interactions, that there was a limit of boundary that was not there, and I just ask for help a lot more. And then a lot more happens. So that's how I feel are some of my good moments.
So there's that limit of boundary that's not there, and then you ask for help a lot more. Say more about that. How does that work?
One of the things I've learned along the way is that that most people don't ask enough for help, and I'm not going to go into details now, but at about 19, 20, I learned really asking for help. Before that, I wasn't really good at asking for help, but then something happened that really made me ask for help, because basically I had no choice. But that was, at that time, I did it really when I was in trouble and I needed people to help me. But what I've learned in the last 20 years since then is that actually asking for help when I think everything is okay and when I think I have everything under control is actually even more powerful. And that's something that I didn't do before, at least. I thought, I need to be smart and I need to be, I need to be able to do everything on my own, because somehow I learned, or I picked up along the way, that asking for help is a sign of weakness, and I shouldn't do that too much. But what I learned the last 20 years is actually more the opposite, is that, the people who get most done is they ask for help a lot more. And still I notice that even if I do know that, I might not always do that enough. And when I'm tired, I think slower, so I might not know everything I need to know, and I might be much quicker asking for help. There's also less boundaries in the sense that, oh, I should not ask this or that person, what will he think? Then I will just blurt out and ask for help. And yeah, sometimes people filter me out and say, well, sorry, I'm not going to help. And in most other cases, they really want to help, because that's how people are. People want to help out. Mm-hmm. And when I ask for multiple people for help, I am always surprised about the ideas that people have that I didn't have. So even if I would be fully awake and would use all of my brains, well, that would still not give the same results as asking so many other people for help.
So even though you've learned all of that, even though you've had all that experience of asking for help, it's not when you're at your most awake that you ask for the most help. It's actually when you're tired.
Yeah, well, I see, of course, a lot of the collaboration I do is when I'm at home in the evening, which I'm, of course, also more tired from a day of work. Mm-hmm. So it's just also in timing. But I think so that, yes, even if after everything I've learned, well, the first 20 years are really teaching people a lot. And there's a lot of things that how would I say it, are some kind of muscle memory that we don't do that enough. And even with everything I know, it still is sometimes, oh, I should ask, or will I do this? And I just have a lot less that in the evening.
Mm-hmm. So to sort of pick up that theme of their less boundaries, less filters, when it's like that, you are like what?
Oh, that's an interesting question. It's a hard. I'm tempting to say I'm much more like a child, but I don't think that's the truth. But I cannot come up with something better. When I'm less boundaries, yeah, it's the best thing I can come up with right now. It's like I'm much more looking open to the world on what's happening around me, and we're open for opportunities and for help that I can get.
Mm-hmm. So a bit like a child, not really like a child, but open to the world, open to opportunities, like that.
Yes.
And is there anything else about how you are when you're like that?
You mean when I'm much more open?
Yeah, when you're open like that.
I think in a way I'm more relaxed. I'm a person who likes I like to be busy. I like to do stuff. And so when I'm tired, I might not have the full adrenaline rushing. And so because of that, I might be much more relaxed, mm-hmm. which helps as well.
So when you're like that, when you haven't got so much adrenaline and you're open to the world, open for opportunities, a bit like a child, less boundaries, and more willing to ask for help, then, and you mentioned earlier that mostly when you're the kind of collaborations you've been involved in have started when you've had a problem of your own that you wanted to solve.
Yes.
Say a bit more about that. How do those two fit together?
Well, let's give an example. I think it might help here. Is that one of the earliest collaboration things I did is about, I think, 2007, something like that. I just switched my whole email system to Google, to the whole Google thing, so mm-hmm. Google domain. So I had a calendar, and I had the options in Google to create extra calendars. So I said, oh, I have one for my wife or my child, one per child. I have one for myself. I have one for a big client or something like that. And then I realized, actually I go to a lot of conferences to talk or just to visit. It might be interesting to have a calendar for just all the interesting conferences.
Mm-hmm.
And when I created that, I just added, I don't know, 10 conferences that I knew that existed. And I thought, oh, that's actually, I usually go there with a lot of other friends. So why don't I share this with friends? And then Google asked me, do you want to share it in a read-only format, or do you want to give people full read and write access? And I was like, oh, but these are friends. Let's give them full write access so they can actually add other stuff to it. And over the years, now I think it's about 70 to 80 people that I shared this with and are actually filling in these calendars. And because now we split them up in 3 different kind of type of calendars. And I actually don't add any events anymore to these calendars. Most of my time comes into administration, adding people, or when I receive an email that somebody deleted something from the calendar, I politely ask, are you sure that this is not something that conference doesn't exist anymore? Or is it just because you thought it was in your own calendar and you removed it? Or when somebody, like recently somebody added an appointment to the hairdresser to that public calendar. So things like that. So I'm not busy anymore with adding the stuff by myself, just with the administration part. But yes, it's maintained by, I don't know the latest number, but I know it's pretty much over 70. And I think we're nearly at 80 people right now who are adding stuff to it.
In terms of that, the usefulness of that, how has that ended up being used?
I know that a few conferences are using it also to look at when are other conferences happening. So for organizing their own, they look at what's in there. The calendar, the main calendar, Agile conferences calendar, has a public URL, and so I have no idea how many people are using it. But it's keep getting published, and I keep getting other people that tell me that they've used it before. The data is actually used in a kind of forked project where they show the same conferences, but then on a location map and stuff like that. So I think it's pretty big. Well, big. It's not 10,000 people, but I think there's I think there's still a lot of hundreds of people that are using this one. So. Mm-hmm. In that sense, it's a nice project.
Very interesting. And an example of something I also wanted to ask you about specifically, which is a collaboration which is not a face-to-face collaboration, but a virtual collaboration.
Yes. So in this case, it's a really interesting case because we never have meetings. We never do anything. The work is actually completely independent because you think, hey, there's this nice conference and I've noticed it's not on the calendar. So you can just add it manually and we don't need to have any interaction there. I did at some point create a mailing list just to have some conversations because some people were asking me, can I add this or can I add that? And I wasn't always sure. So at some point I said, instead of just me taking all these decisions, I'm again a bottleneck, and maybe it's not just about me. Why don't I create a mailing list so that people can have some of those conversations? But it's really very limited. I think it's one email every week, probably not even. So there is very limited traffic on that mailing list, but it's there for when we have some kind of discussions or some kind of things, we can have some discussion. But as I said, there is no meeting. So it in that sense, it's not really a project because all the tasks are completely independent. But people are doing it, and it's completely it's scalable that way, because people from all over the world can do it. That makes it also interesting. It's not just about, well, I'm from Europe, so people thought, oh, this is just European things. No, there's actually a lot of Americans helping out. So it's really a global thing. There are Asian conferences in there as well, Eastern Europe conferences in there. So it's actually used all over the world. But it's a different way. And it learned me a lot of things about remote collaboration, because it made me realize that in some of the other projects that I'm doing, that there are also no meetings. I'm actually, as an Agile coach, I don't always like email because I know it's not the best communication tool. But for most of these projects, email is actually the tool that we use to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
And what it made me realize is that in Agile, when they said co-location is best and we want people, blah, blah, blah. And I agree, when we put people together, things go a lot easier. But that's really because we have much bigger trust, and because it's the biggest way of communicating. If we're sitting next to each other, we can look each other in the eye. It helps in a lot of things. And yes, when people are in another country, it's hard. I know this when I'm 1 week in another country. Even communication with my wife is harder because yes, we're separated and it's not always easy. And still, when you have enough trust, it can work in a different way. You just need to find ways on how things work. And one of the things that can help is if the jobs or the tasks are completely independent, mm-hmm. then there is no much need to communicate. Well, of course, when this person added the hairdresser thing into the event, yes, then there is some communication. I need to ask, why did you add it? Are you sure? In a polite way, and not to make them feel too much embarrassed. It was actually a really funny situation because, of course, this person removed it immediately, and then 10 minutes later, somebody else added it again, which was as a kind of joke, I assumed, with the exact same data and everything. So it was really like, it was not somebody else who added his or her hairdressing. No, it was the exact same thing. And I really found that very funny.
That is very odd.
So that gave again a very nice conversation with the three of us in email. It also shows that this kind of jokes you can have in a virtual team, which always helps to create more trust. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting because one of them, the person who added it, I don't remember the exact name, but I'm pretty sure that I've never met that person. So even there, it's just funny ways how we can have a little bit of fun with each other without so much damage. But it's really, yeah, even without knowing each other, we dare to do this kind of fun stuff.
So there are so many people who would say, well, that's impossible. I mean, the people who created Agile were originally saying, you've got to have co-location. You can't do it remotely. And yet we know you can do it remotely. What's the trick? What is it that's, what makes it work?
Well, there's multiple things. One, when Agile was created in 2001, 2002, when they created the manifesto and all the Agile methodologies that were created in the 90s, we didn't have all these tools. We did have the start of the internet, but that's really the start. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the tools make it easier. So that's one. But next to that, I in a sense, I agree. The best way to work in an Agile way is to be co-located. But I look at it from a different point of view because Agile should never be a goal. Agile is just a tool to help you. And sometimes distributed is the only way to have it. Mm-hmm. I worked with a Belgian-Russian team. And the reason why we worked with these people from Russia is well, first of all, we didn't find more people in Belgium, but more of it, they were really some of the smartest people I've ever worked with. So this was really not about outsourcing for money, saving money and blah, blah, blah. This was really outsourcing to find the brains. So mm-hmm. for me, this is for doing it for the right reasons. And then the opposite becomes true. So it's not, it's really, if you want to do distributed, for me, Agile is the best way to do it. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of the tools and a lot of the things that we do and both the mindsets, but also a lot of the practices are there to help us communicate better, are there to create much more of a team. So one of the things we had build servers on both sides, both in Russia and both in Belgium. And what I've noticed in developers is that they might not always like to discuss, and they might not always, like most people, they don't like feedback. If somebody tells you it's wrong, we don't like it. But if a computer tells you that something is wrong, we kind of accepted it more, and especially developers. Mostly because they know, for example, if a test tells it's no longer working, if we've written the test ourselves, and basically we're arguing with ourselves.
Yes.
So it's a previous version of us who told us, hey, this you need to check. And then 6 months later, I forgot about it. And I'm just reminded about something that I knew 6 months ago. So that helps. If you now have two sides, well, it could be that when something is wrong, I could have written the test, or it could be that someone else, a colleague of mine, has written the test. In both cases, it's the same thing. It's a computer telling me, hey, you forgot something. So it makes it easier. But now, if I have to test something, so if I receive some software, a new version that's coming from another country, from another place, Russia or Romania, or I don't know, another country, I need to test and do some stuff. But if actually my computer is already checking for me all of these things that I knew before, it actually helps the communication. The Belgium-Russian team, at some point we had 16, and I think now this team has 20 or 25,000 tests. That doesn't tell me that nothing's wrong. It just tells me that the 20,000 things that worked yesterday are still working today, or not. And that helps the communication. It can help us focus on what we need to do. On the other hand, another thing that I did, especially with that Russian team that was really interesting, is that I talked on Skype. Skype was, I think, 2 years old or something like that. So that was a new technology. We used it a lot. And so with one of my colleagues in Russia, in the beginning, I talked either over chat or just talking for 6 to 8 hours in a day. So that is expensive in the sense that I was not programming. That person was not programming at the time. But we did invest in that because it was helping to create one team. So that helped us to make sure that there was enough trust, that we understood each other. And actually, if you think about that, talking for 6 straight hours, that was more than the time I was talking at that time with my partner. I mean, 6 hours of talking, not a lot of people do that in a one-on-one situation. And even, as I say, one-on-one, but sometimes it was with multiple people in the same chat room. But it was about 6 to 8 hours. Of course, this wasn't a full project, not all the time, but there were a few weeks where that happened like this, because we needed to create connection and we needed to create trust.
And when what you're talking about is important enough, people are willing, I mean, for people who are sort of younger people who are just completely used to being able to use Skype all the time for video calls with people, the idea that we used to just use a text chat and yet build really close relationships with people seems absurd. But I know, because I was doing a similar thing at a similar time, that of course you could build those relationships.
The fun part is I think that Skype at that time offered already video, but it didn't work out that well. Partially because especially when we connected with 3 or 4 people, then really the network wasn't good enough. Funny part was, it was possible to chat with more than 3 or 4 people on a video chat. It's just that the connection wasn't good. These days you have to pay to Skype if you want to talk with more than 3 people on a video screen. But at that time it was still free. But we scaled down, and even talking and just by voice, we didn't always do. That is also partially because of the language. But some of the people from Russia, they didn't feel at ease in talking as much in English, and they preferred chatting. It was some confusion with us because there was at least one person in Russia that in the first 6 months we never heard talk because he felt that he couldn't talk, but he chatted pretty okay in English. that at some point we even joked that he might not even exist, that it was just an extra resource or an extra person that they invented in Russia. But in the end, he came to Belgium, so I know he exists. It was just that he felt that he couldn't, and it's true, his English was not as good as the other people from Russia, but his English was more than enough. Mm-hmm. He just didn't feel as comfortable doing that. And again, chat helped it in multiple ways. It helped him to get confidence to say something. It goes a little bit slower. And at the same time, you do have a trace from it, which can also be interesting, because we, especially if you have a discussion for half an hour, at some point we agree on something, and then, okay, what did we agree on? Okay, we sometimes need to look back at the log to realize what we discussed. So that helped as well.
Yeah. So just to backtrack a little bit, you were saying that when you have a distributed team, Agile really helps.
Yes.
What is it about Agile that helps in that situation?
Feedback. For me, it's mostly feedback. Agile is really, feedback is a crucial part of a lot of the things in Agile. And yes, we would like to respond to change. We like to have feedback in multiple ways, and that's really what is making it work. Because we work in very small chunks and we send it over to each other. We see it if it's working or if it's not working. We want changing requirements. Why? Because we realize that there's no customer that actually knows what he wants. Even myself, I might not know what I want. And if they send me something, I know, oh, that's not it. Now I know better that's what I really want. Mm-hmm.
So with small iterations, small experiments, each piece of feedback is presumably less frightening.
Yes. That's how it works. Now, it's also easier in smaller projects and smaller things. I'm now helping a pretty large corporation, and they're not used to, so they came from a complete waterfall mindset. They don't like feedback, and everything has been put in place in the last, let's say, 10 years is all to reduce bad things, and they want it to be the first time right and stuff like that. And so now we start with Agile, and now we start with getting much quicker feedback, and they really need to adjust to that because they're not used to. Mm-hmm. And it reminds me of the first guitar players in the 50s and the 60s that started to use feedback on their electric guitars. The first time that there was a recording done by the Beatles and Rolling Stones, when they recorded guitars with feedback, the record companies sent them back the tapes because they said, oh, it's wrong, there is feedback on it. But that's because they didn't understand that is what they really wanted. And so even there, people in the industry didn't know. Well, they did know feedback, but they thought it was something bad. Mm-hmm. And now we have these innovative guitarists that try to use it to make nice sounds with it. And they didn't understand it. And then that's a little bit the same for me in corporations. We need to learn to work with feedback. First of all, we need to give feedback in a nicer way, but we also need to learn that, yes, when we do something, we are not right from the first time. So we need to learn that, hey, yes, we are not right from the first time, and we will adjust. And a lot of companies are not ready for that. They still think, oh, we're not right from the first time. Who did wrong and what's wrong? No, we know this by design that we will be wrong the first time. That's why we don't want to spend ages trying to figure it out what is exactly right, because we know we won't be able to do that. If 80% of the things are already right without too much thinking, I'm not going to say no thinking, but without too much thinking, we've gained a lot of time. Okay, we lost some time on the 20%, but we got very quick feedback. Mm-hmm. I have an exercise that we've done for an Agile training, and I'm probably not the only one because I've learned it somewhere else, but we ask people to just stand in one line, and the very first part is, okay, you stand from length. So the tallest at one side and the smallest at the other side. That's pretty easy. You see that, you look at the people around you, and you know that you're doing it right. Then we ask the same thing for the number of years you work at this company. You know some of the people, so you might know more or less how long they work there, and we can figure this out. And actually, when you then go the line and ask how long do you work, a couple of weeks, a couple of months, I've done this last week with 40 people, and I think we had 5 people who were wrongly situated. There was one person 6 years, that was all at the complete end, and another at the other end. So there's a few people that are wrong, but we checked. So they did this, I think, in about 2 to 3 minutes, probably less. They created the line, and then in less than half a minute, we checked and we found the people who were wrong, and we fixed the line. And that's it. That's less than 5 minutes. If I would ask people to write papers and to make sure that they have the exact perfect line, and you only get one chance, it will take them probably 20 minutes before they figure it out. Mm-hmm. Even if they could talk. And this exercise they actually did without talking. So. Mm-hmm. So yes, it's feedback learning. Do something, make a mistake, but have enough, time that we win that makes up for the mistakes, and then we can correct it along the way.
And with that illustration, I think it really gives a good feel for why, when teams are distributed, working in an agile way with iterations, with feedback, is actually going to work so much better than a waterfall process. If you've got everybody together doing routine stuff all in one place, you can just about see waterfall working occasionally. Mm-hmm. If you've got everybody distributed, it's just no chance.
No, or you have to do, to make sure that you totally don't make any mistake, and you have to know everything up front, and there's very little chance that happens. Actually, building houses, we've been building houses for probably at least 2,000 years, maybe a lot longer, and nobody can build a house within time and within budget. Well, not completely true. The ones who can create a house within time and budget are the ones where they create, let's say, in a part of a city, they create 10 the same houses. Mm-hmm. Then they can do this. The first one, they need to figure it out a little bit. The second one goes already better. And by the time they have finished the 10th house, they know pretty well how long it will take and how much it will cost. Mm-hmm. But we don't do that in IT. There is a lot of people think, we'll just create a new version of this project, but that's not true. The situation, the world has changed so much, because that's the reason why we're doing the new project, that we still end up changing a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And of course, IT is changing so much of the rest of the world as well, which is presumably why so many other people are needing to adopt these kinds of approaches to work.
I think so. The whole world is changing. It always goes faster, and in a lot of things. But on top of that, we are also using our own tools to change our own environment, which is also speeding stuff up.
Mm-hmm. And on the subject of speeding stuff up, I just realised the time, and we are over our self-imposed limit of half an hour. So we'd better draw this to a close. Much as I'm reluctant to do so, because it's such an interesting conversation. However, I said half an hour, and let's stick with that. So, if people want to contact you and find out about the kinds of things that you're up to, who do you want to hear from, and how should they contact you?
I'm interested in hearing a lot of things. Let's start with the contacting before I forget it. The best way to contact me is on Twitter. So that's Yves. So that's at Yves Hanoulle in one word. And assume you can probably add a link that somewhere in with the podcast. Mm-hmm. And one of the projects that I've started a few months ago is I'm actually writing a book about hiring people. It's not about the whole process of finding people, but it's really about selecting the people. Mm-hmm. And there's actually a lot of agile coaches who are involved, as I am, in selecting people for teams. And so and at some point, one of my ex-clients called me back and said, well, you had a list with some questions and some ideas on how to ask. Could you share this with me? And once I hear this, it's like, oh, share it with one person. Why don't I share it with the rest of the world? Mm-hmm. So I created a Google Doc. I added the things in there. I shared it with that person. And also asked, well, could you add the things that you would do? And before we knew it, we had, again, more than 30 people helping out. So it's on Google Doc because it's the easiest version right now, or easiest way to share it. It will probably move to LeanPub in the coming months. But right now, we still have some chapters that needs to be edited. And so I'm actually actively looking for people who have some interest in finding people or selecting people, but also have some techniques that are, let's say, more unusual. Because sometimes, well, I know that asking questions is not the best way to do it. Sometimes it's much better to ask people to do some kind of work and to find out by doing some kind of work how good they are. And there are some other exercises that are in the book. So there might be people, I'm pretty sure that most professional people at some point were helping out with selecting people. So I'm interested to see who has interesting and crazy ideas to add to the book.
That sounds exciting. I'm looking forward to reading it already.
I will share it with you immediately after our talk.
Great, thank you. So, with all of that, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I know people will have learned loads and loads from listening to this conversation. And best of luck with the book, and best of luck with all your other collaborations, because I know there are many.
Thank you. It was, again, wonderful to do this. So thank you very much.
Thank you.